Discipleship team, led by Scott Sullivan, exists to help churches take the next step toward becoming a healthy, disciple-making church. We've developed tools to help you, like the Watershed Principle, the Spark Conference. Access it today at thesparkconference.com. We're also setting up learning communities across Georgia. Find a community near you at gabaptist.org/discipleship. Now let's join today's broadcast.
Hey everyone, welcome to the broadcast. We have a really fun one today. And what I mean by fun is Jenni Carter. I think we should lead with Jenni Carter. Well, we all like bragging about her, but you know why? Because she's everywhere. Like when I looked up omnipresent, I saw that Jenni Carter's name was there because she leads VBS all over the state. But it's so much more than that, Jenni. Why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about how long you've been with the mission board and kind of what it is that you do.
All right. I'm Jenni Carter. I am a Next Gen Consultant, kids ministry. Don't ask me about youth. Okay. I'm preschool and kids ministry. I've been doing this almost 10 years. August will be 10 years that I've been doing this. I am here to help equip the church and the church leaders to minister to preschoolers, to children, and to their families, and just looking for ways to help do that, through podcasts like this and any other way that I can be of assistance. I love visiting in the churches and just seeing where they are and how I can take them to the next level.
Yeah, and Chris and I are newer to the team, so you've been a real big help to both of us, trying to help us reach the state and advance the gospel. And so then we have Chris. I have a podcast, Trent, who is killing it over in that space. Chris, I was talking to somebody the other day, and they were telling me that I should listen to this podcast, and it was yours. That's a real story, like, not making it up.
Great.
And,
awesome.
And so it's really catching on. I think you know that. So tell our audience a little bit about you.
Yeah. So, hey, I'm Chris Trent, and I am our Next Gen Catalyst for the Georgia Baptist Mission Board, which means I get to work in both student ministry world and kids ministry world, although really part of my description is just my job description is to stay out of Jenni Carter's way. That's part of the deal. And so that's my goal. But honestly, it's awesome to get to kind of think into both worlds a little bit. I lean heavily, though, in the student ministry world. I'm a student pastor, youth pastor at heart. Recently wrapped up a stint for about 17 years at Johnson Ferry Baptist. Been with the mission board now for a couple of years and really spent a lot of time traveling the state, working with youth pastors, working with churches, helping them think through youth ministry. Of course, we've also got some events like Super Wow and Impact and Move Conference and things like that that are hopefully making a huge dent when it comes to the gospel with teenagers. So we're doing that. We've also got the youth ministry podcast for volunteers, which is a big thing that we've been doing lately. So yeah, man. Love
yeah.
So yeah.
And doing it really well. And so Chris has really led out and been a thought leader on our team. And for those of you I haven't not met, my name is PJ Dunn. I serve as a discipleship consultant here on our team. Scott Sullivan is our state catalyst who leads all those things. And man, we love partnering together with all the parts of what we do at Georgia Baptist because honestly, we just can't get to everything. And so when we were talking about this series, we were trying to come up with discipling the generations, and you can't answer that without defining the generations a little bit. And so, when we look at Gen Z, that student age, that sub 25-year-old right now, trying to figure out who they are and how to disciple them. I mean, we couldn't help but bring you all in and want to hear from both of you because you travel the state, but you also travel the country, go to the conferences. You're constantly learning what's new, what's out there, and both of you are lifelong learners. And so, Chris, I want to hear from you first. Tell us a little bit about Gen Z, and then we'll dive into the topic.
Yeah, that's a great question. Obviously, it's a loaded question too, in the sense that there's probably 100 different directions we could go, on this thing. I think one of the, it's definitely easy to focus on some of the negative things related to Gen Z, and there are some things that are really hard, like most statistics right now are showing us that this current generation of teenagers and younger adults, up to that like 20-something-year-old age, that young 20 age, it's the loneliest generation on record, which that's a real problem. That's a real challenge. And, my wife and I, we teach a parenting thing, and we call it staying connected in an overly connected world, because we really feel like that's part of the challenge right now, is that we're so connected, but yet we feel often like we're unconnected. Like, it's interesting that teenagers are more connected than ever before, but yet they're the loneliest, generation on record. So that's interesting. And what's great about working with Jenni and I being able to work together on this thing is she knows, and we know that the kids that are growing up right now, they're moving into those same type of things. They're experiencing all of those things, even though at this point, she's probably starting to work a lot now with what they're going to probably end up calling like the alpha, the Gen A, Gen Alpha generation. And we're starting to do studies on that, as well. The good news about Generation Z, though, Gen Z generation really would be that they are, there's a lot of passion in a really good way for this generation when it comes to how, when they're in, they're in.
Yeah.
So what we're seeing is a lot of these teenagers, man, when they go all in for the gospel, they go all in for the gospel. And that's a real win, I think, there. And they're kind of a get it done generation as well. We're seeing, when it comes to church type things, they're willing to get their hands dirty and try to make a difference there. So I think there's a lot to be encouraged about. And a lot of folks are referring to them kind of behind the scenes as really the revival generation. I think that's worth being mindful of as well, that this really is a generation that we might see some really interesting things take place through this generation when it comes to the church, when it comes to walking of the faith.
Yeah. Well, and there's, man, just so much. So we're going to keep unpacking a little bit of that. So when you said the revival generation and like there's a church side when you were talking that I was thinking, how does this apply in the church? And then how does this apply in the world? And then we want to connect that worldly passion back to what Jesus calls us to. And so in the last couple of years, we saw some movements and social media was a part of that. And it turned into in-person movements and it turned into organizations. And you're right. This generation, when they're on fire, like you can't keep them, you can't stop them. Like they have the passion. They're not lazy. And I think every generation gets like a stereotype of you're young and you haven't learned yet. I think that's, there's some commonalities throughout history, but there's some distinctives here that's happening in Gen Z. And you're right, Alpha is so early in it. We just don't really know too much about them. We're just kind of guessing. So we're going to focus more on Gen Z for this. And I was talking at Reinhardt University just the other night and talking about, what does it mean to be whole in Christ? Because you can chase after these things of the world, but that'll never fill you. And the responses, Chris, really took me off guard. Like I wasn't expecting a group that would talk. I was expecting a group that would kind of sit there and maybe not engage. But when you stop and ask a question, they're like, oh, you're going to involve me? I'm all in. Introverts or not. And I scared a couple of them. Right. But that's a stereotype. Like they don't want to be involved, but they do. Right.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's definitely a stereotype, and Jenni, I'd be curious, I'm definitely seeing that in youth ministry world where I think there's a little bit of a movement to have teenagers more involved in the process. So it's not like we're just doing this for them, but we're doing this with them. Jenni, do you feel like that in children's ministry world, there's been a shift in that as well, like in kids ministry, where it's not just, we're not just doing things for them, but we're involving them. They're coming alongside us.
Yes, very much so. They're wanting to serve, even at young ages. They're wanting to help. They're wanting to serve. They're wanting to, they're like, tell me what I need to do, and I will do, as far as Bible reading, all the things. They're ready. They very much are. I think for Gen Alpha, I think one of the things we're going to see that has changed them more than anything is obviously COVID. I was talking with preschool and children's people yesterday, and they were talking about how more than ever before, they're nervous about sending their kids up to youth ministry. They're like, they're not ready. And I don't think they meant spiritually, but they meant in other ways, socially. And I said, well, they lost a few years. They lost some time there. So that's going to be another thing that we're going to have to face with that, is thinking about how we navigate that.
And Jenni, you and I have talked about this with Harper. So Harper is 9, but if you go back to 3 years ago, we moved from Texas to Georgia, and she's on spring break. When we leave Texas, she never goes back to school. She's a kindergarten dropout. And one day she'll laugh at that. She doesn't know what that means yet, but we call, you're a kindergarten dropout. And so she never went back to school. We had to do all this paperwork. And so I'm going to brag, all right, because we are talking families, right? So there's Harper, everybody. And so she's just happy as can be. And that is
she must take after her mom, dude.
she absolutely
beautiful.
praise the Lord. Yeah, praise the Lord for
Just throw
that.
that out there as an observation.
We were shocked that the blonde hair happened. If I'm being honest, when she came out, I was like, "Whoa!" Like, because mom does not. She has dark hair. But this picture was taken just before we left Texas, when the world was like not quite right, in blue bonnets. All right, so that's the Texas thing, right? And so Jenni, we came, and then she lost like all of that time, and then we had to play catch up on academics. We had to play catch up on relationships. Harper was an extroverted kid, so being at home alone really was hard for her to not have multiple relationships. And so now we almost forget that happened. When we're making discipleship strategies, when we're talking with people, we almost forget that it happens, but our educators don't. The school teachers are telling us, man, we still see the effects of what's going on. My wife is now a parapro. She works with K4, and even that K4 is very different than they have been in the past because of some of those things they didn't learn due to the pandemic. So let me shift it this way and talk about one of those major differences. You know, Chris, when we were talking about doing this podcast and really drilling into one, talk about the relational authority. Talk about how this is different than any generation. Because I've made an overstatement, like every young generation kind of has the same stuff, and you were like, "Well, you're wrong." And so,
that's not how I did that. It's like
exactly
I said,
yeah.
I'm going to push back on that just a little bit, is what I said. I was sure not to.
Sure. Yeah. So go ahead. Yeah. Push back on that for a second.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, you know, there's a great study. I highly recommend Springtide Institute. They're doing some great work. They study kids that are religious kids, to be fair, just so you know where this is coming from. Meaning they're not just studying Christian kids. They're also studying kids from other religious backgrounds as well. But that said, it still big time applies to the type of kids we work with. So when you think about the teenager today, you know, middle school, high school type students today, they've coined this phrase called relational authority. And the idea of relational authority is that a kid is not going to give you, like a teenager is not going to give you authority in their life unless there is a relationship there. Now, to be fair, track with me here for a second. If I would have said to anybody listening before, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care, we would all agree with that because intuitively we understand that, right? But there's something else that has changed. According to the stats and some of the things they point to, used to, even though that might be true, used to a kid, though, would allow an adult of authority, especially an authoritative figure, they would trust what that adult said. They would respect what that adult said, but something has changed. And that is now, if there's not a relationship built there, there's a little bit of a pushback on, I'm not sure I can trust what you're telling me right now. So I've been blessed to teach and talk about this throughout Georgia in the last year. And what's been interesting, not kidding, 3 different times football coaches have walked up to me and said, "Chris, you have no idea. Used to, I could tell a kid to run through a brick wall, and because I was the coach, they would run through the brick wall. But now something has changed. If I don't take the time to get to know the kid, to build up trust with the kid, I have a harder time getting that kid to act on that." So what does that mean? Well, when you start to unpack that when it comes to discipleship and you start thinking about the church and the impact of the church, this is a little bit of an indictment. I know that sounds like a strong word, but it's a little bit of an indictment on this idea that, hey, we're going to do this Wednesday night thing where all of these teenagers come and I do this thing on stage where I teach, and that just that's what it is. Well, they may come and they may enjoy it, but whether or not they're giving authority to the youth pastor or whoever's teaching, that's a different question nowadays. Yeah. And what it really points back to is the importance of relationships, which means we're going to need to have more volunteers. We're going to need to have more adults in a kid's life to ultimately help dictate that. So if I'm a parent hearing this, especially, I'm thinking, man, say I need to be discipling my kids, but not only that, I need to make sure that my kids they've got other folks as well. What's interesting, Jenni, though, is I don't think this is, in youth ministry, we're starting to go, but I think in children's ministry, the idea of smaller classrooms with adults, smaller groups of kids, this is not new to y'all. Y'all have been tracking for this for a while. And if anything, y'all caused all of it. I'm kidding. But when you hear this, how do you tie that into kind of these older children that are starting to move up into teenage world?
Right. I think you're right. I mean, children's ministry, they've gotten it is about building the relationships with the kids and with the families. I think sometimes though we veered away from it. I mean, I will show my age. When I was growing up, my Sunday school teacher came to see me a minimum of 4 times a year, came to my home to visit me. Now, these days, I know, she was bringing me my Sunday school quarterly. Okay. But it was a home visit. It wasn't get it at church.
Mm-hmm.
She came to visit me 4 times a year. And that happened most of my childhood. So they were doing it very, very well then, but also I knew they were a part of my life. They came to piano recitals. They did. And that's what, we have to encourage our leaders today. And yes, it can't just be that one person. The one person can't do all that. It's got to be these Sunday school teachers, these people that are with them on Sundays and Wednesdays, whenever, pouring into their lives. Yeah.
Which crazy enough. Go ahead, BJ.
I'm having a moment. All right. So I'm having a moment. And that moment is,
well, you're sitting with 2 really, really smart people, BJ. I don't doubt
I'm
that you're
feeling it. Like I'm feeling here. I'm going to get some more. I am not worthy. Okay. Of what's happening right now. If you didn't just take a note of what just happened and how you could change something in your processes tomorrow, when we stop treating our families like cattle and we actually take the time to give them the curriculum, maybe they would use it. I mean, think about the relational investment that takes. But PJ, I don't have time for that. I don't have volunteers for that. But oh my gosh, the backside of that relationship, that's not a dead concept, what Jenni's telling right now. Like that is something you could implement in any size church.
Well, here's the challenge, though. I think we need to make note of this, though, and acknowledge this out loud. For anybody in a church position, y'all know this is true. The challenge that comes with that now, though, is the definition of what is a regular attender has changed. And it's much smaller now, right? In terms of how often an adult or a family attends your church each Sunday or each Wednesday, which means we have even less time to accomplish this relational type thing.
Yeah.
But what I think the way we have to unpack that, though, is we have to then go, okay, when it comes to my programming, I've got to make sure that I take advantage of my programming and building in moments to build relationships, not just the next big game, not just the next big, fun illustration in kids ministry world, whatever that looks like, but that there actually has to be, I'm getting to know you. I know about you. You know about me. There's a two-way, and then that authority can be given there.
When I do training with preschool and children's leaders, I have them get in groups and think of what are some things you can ask that child just to get to know them. Has nothing to do with the Bible lesson for today. What are some questions? They'll come up, ask them about their pets. And I always say a new one for most of them is ask them what YouTube stars are they watching? Who are they watching on YouTube? Because, for most people my age, they're like, what? And then I tell them, go home and watch it. Go home and watch those YouTube so that you can come back next week and say, that was great, or that was funny, or why in the world you watch, find out, where they are, meet them in their world.
And that's totally a thing. Like, I'm pretty sure we're going to buy a hamster. And I said, I don't want to buy a hamster. And it's all because Harper watched this YouTube video of one of these families who went and bought it and set it up, and it was awesome. And I'm like, we're not going to do that. I'm just going to be on it. Well, it all came from that video. Well, that's exactly what we grew up. We grew up watching TV, or we grew up doing activities, and we got these ideas and we want to mimic it. And then we'll say, man, I can't believe you watch online people play. And like, you watch HGTV, you watch people play with their house and their adult money. It's the same exact concept.
Yeah.
So don't judge your children for what we're all learning. And so that goes into like what we're imitating and who we want to imitate. So Jenni, how can church leaders disciple their child if their parent can't or won't be a part of that process at home?
Yeah. Well, and sometimes it's figuring out where parents are. Some of them don't do it because they don't know what to do. And so a lot of it is education. How do you help them do that? I have several friends that whatever they're doing on Sunday morning, like in kids worship, they'll have someone take a picture of them doing a science experiment, showing whatever they're doing that day. And then that afternoon they post it on Facebook, and they'll say, hey, ask your child about whatever the picture is and how that relates to Daniel's life in the Bible, and then how does it relate to your, and so it's just continuing the conversation. There's a super simple way to help bridge that. For some, it's giving them resources. A lot of churches these days will have a parent resource wall. Now, I've gotten some pushback on that. Some people, yeah, we have it, but nobody ever goes to it. Well, if you don't draw attention to it, periodically say, hey, there's a great article here, they're not going to just automatically go pick things up to help that. So doing that, but also being that person, if you've got that one and the parents like, I'm not going to do it, or maybe they're not Christians. They're coming from a non-Christian home. We have a lot of churches that still have van ministries where kids are coming in. And so being that person that's building that relationship with that child, letting them know, I care about you. And so then helping them know how to read their Bible every day. Like, what Bible verse are you learning? Things like that, just pouring into that child. I have story after story of people who said, this is the person that poured into me. This is the person that bought me my first Bible, that came and picked me up. Their family came and picked me up and brought me to church and helped me to know what it means to pray. All the spiritual disciplines, just guiding. But every child needs to have somebody at church who is cheering for them, who is there for them. And even the ones that do have their great homes. So yeah, everybody. So find that person. If every church member had some child that they're pouring into, then it would help each child.
And Chris, I want you to respond to that. But it's also, if you haven't wrote a comment at this point, please take a moment and do that. Specifically, I feel like there's a Super Mario's mushroom in the background of Jenni Carter's video. I don't know if y'all noticed that. It looks like if she jumps on it, she might, grow and be able to jump really high in there. And then I want to know, is that Phantasmic or Harry Potter hat in the back for those of us that are judging you, Chris?
That would be Mickey Mouse, Sorcerer Mickey. Yeah.
Sorcerer Mickey. So tell us a little bit, like, when specifically 40% of all families are single parent households.
Yeah.
So when you talk about this at the church level and you served really well for years doing that, how do you address that?
Yeah. So here's the thing, man. I think a parent discipling their kid, I get that there are unique challenges, obviously, to single parent households. I like to say, I get to say this now since I'm not working directly for a church. And if you put 100 kids in a room, 100 teenagers that like just graduated high school, let's say into their freshman year of college, and all 100 of these kids are walking with the Lord in a way where we would all be like, man, they get it. They have an authentic walk with Jesus. They're still faithful. They like to go to church. They want to be a part of God's word, all of that. I think what we don't like to talk about a lot, and we probably should talk about more, is if you show me 100 kids like that, I will show you a huge majority of those kids that have parents, whether that's one parent or two parents, that have authentic walks with Jesus. Now, I'm leaving room for outliers. I get that there are outliers. I'm an example of that. My parents were not believers, unchurched, growing up. I was an exception to that rule. I know that there are kids that have godly parents that are wayward, right? But generally speaking, though, you put a group of people together that they get it, it's going to be because their parents have authentic walks with Jesus, right?
Yeah.
So what I'm more interested in when we were talking about this kind of thing, whether that be a single parent or, whatever, I'm interested in parents that have authentic walks with Jesus. Because to me, we can, Jenni and I can recommend resources all day long. Adults can, the church pastors can recommend resources all day long. But what you cannot replace is having a parent that genuinely is walking with the Lord, both a mom and a dad. So I like to key in on that a lot of times when we're talking about discipleship. And I think a lot of times when it comes to a lot of folks that are probably listening to this, it's not always so much, hey, what thing can I give parents to do a better job, as much as it is, how can I have parents that authentically love Jesus? Because it's out of that walk with the Lord that kids are ultimately going to develop that same passion for Jesus, if their parents have that. So I think that part's huge.
Yeah. And we talked about this with technology and the family, and, churches will call and we'll all go try to help them with that. And And really it comes down to, what are you modeling? Like, mom, dad, parent, like really it's, how do you use technology? Your shame is not a motivator. So yelling at your kid and saying that you shouldn't, doesn't work. And then you're mad at them and you're on your phone texting about how mad you are at them. And so there's some things that you can set up, right, that can make that differently. And pastors, bivocational pastors that are watching, we're clued in on this because we really want to get it right with the next generation. And it's not all hope is lost, but there is a little bit of a slowdown to go fast. And Jesus did slow down with 12, but he slowed down even more with 3 to really dive in and dig in and have that relationship that really went further. And so it's not like this is uncommon to us, but we're kind of annoyed that we have to slow down. We want people to get it faster, Chris, but you can't manufacture an authentic relationship, an authentic friendship.
Yeah.
You just know it when you see it. You know when somebody really cares about you, right? They do certain things. And so, gosh, when I'm hearing this, I know it's nothing new, but it's almost harder. We're almost asking people to really do something harder. Are y'all hearing it that way too?
Well, yeah, I would circle back to the question you asked Jenni a couple of questions back, where you asked, hey, what do you do with that family or that kid? What do you do for that kid who doesn't have parents that are necessarily all in on this thing, right? So what I think I don't know that it's harder as much as I would say it challenges the way we program. And I think it should challenge how we define success. So meaning, I think we've got to look and make sure, what do you give that kid, whether that's an elementary school kid or a teenager that doesn't have a parent or parents that are walking with the Lord? Yeah. Well, you want to make sure that you're giving them programming that is more than just, boy, they came and they had a good time. Like, it's got to be deeper than that. There's got to be a relationship tied to that, where there is an adult that has. So a lot of that would even be focusing on our volunteers, making sure that, man, each year we are keyed in, not just to whether or not you show up, not just if you're trained to do a good job, but whether or not we're actually shepherding you and helping you to walk with the Lord well. I think that part's huge.
Yeah. What do you think? What do you think, Jenni?
Yes, definitely. I think back to the stories of I remember I served on church staff for over 24 years. And one of my favorites was the last few years we had a group of boys who, family in our church went and picked up every day or every Sunday, every Wednesday. Our church, different ones, one of them we realized was great at like percussion. We had a church member that gave him his own set of drums. We had another one that paid for him to get lessons, and then we made sure our worship pastor was the one that realized what his love was and how he had a talent for it, and he gave him opportunities to serve. But we wanted him to know, no matter what talent the Lord's given you, you can use it for him. But just seeing people pour into them, like I said, picking them up, paying for their camps, it was a beautiful thing to watch. Just building those relationships with them. Yeah.
Well, we're going to land the plane on this final question, just to kind of get y'all's opinions and as we're talking, I thinking about Caleb, and so Caleb is a kid who accepted Christ at a D-Now, as one of the counselors. He was the only kid that accepted Christ in 2020 at this D-Now, big group of people. It was just a very hard year to do those kind of events. And so Caleb and I get to know each other. And the first thing we do is strike a friendship. And the person who actually discipled him and mentored him was a completely different person. It was a completely different process. He was in a class, he had all those people, but Caleb and I stayed connected. And genuinely, I just wanted to be a friend. And I didn't know what I'm doing. Y'all are the gurus. Like, really, like, students just kind of scare me a lot of days. Like, I'm not sure what the street youths are going to do. All right. I work with adults. And so when they herd together, I get scared. So now that I'm just friends with one of them, I lean in a little bit. Well, now Caleb's graduating this year. I got the graduation card. I've stayed in touch with his mother and just kind of some encouragement. How can I pray for you? Not scripted, but just every once in a while. And like, Caleb's part of our lives. And I think that's the friendship we're talking about. We're talking about doing something that's a little bit like, you can't do that for everybody, but maybe you can do it for one, as one leader said. So tell me about what are those first things we can do in that discipleship process? Jenni, I'll have you go first. Like, what's that first step in discipleship for process for kids look like?
For some churches, according to the size of the church, a lot of churches have a new Christian class where they're, they'll have the kids come in, they walk through, okay, this is what a Christian is. And there's typically an activity book. Some churches, probably a lot of the people are watching are not thinking, okay, well, I only have like 2 children, a year that are making this decision. But there's great books that you can walk through. And so it can be a one-on-one thing if you think the parent will walk through that with them. I've done that many times. I would never just give the book to the child. I would make a point to get the child and the parent together and say, here is a great book for you to begin walking through with your child. Y'all do it together. If I didn't feel like the parent would walk through that with them, then I would either take on that role one-on-one, but then there were times that didn't work. And so there were times that I would pair them up with somebody in the church. And I said, would you start the discipleship process with this child? Y'all find a time to come, hour earlier on Wednesday and walk through this together and things like that. So, yeah.
We can over-systematize that relationship part of it and
yes.
It almost neutralizes that. So yeah, Chris, what do you think?
Yeah, I think if I were to show up to anybody's church and they wanted to, man, how can we do a better job with discipleship for our teenagers? I think what I would do first is I would just do an honest evaluation of our programming and ask ourselves, okay, what is the most important thing that we're doing right now in our mind? And is that the thing that's building discipleship moments? And if that thinking is still sort of in that early 2000s thinking of, man, we need to have a big Wednesday night gathering type thing, I think acknowledge that maybe that's not the best recipe for truly discipling a kid. And so start to rethink, okay, well, how are we doing Sunday school / small groups? Is there a space in that to make it not just about, hey, show up, I read from this curriculum and teach you this thing, but rather we start to look at our volunteers and go, hey, how can you pour into their lives? How can you share life with them and try to create moments that lead to that? Along with that, I would take a look also even at some of our bigger events that we do, like, and I think this applies to children's ministry as well, like with VBS, but like youth camp or a youth mission trip or a youth conference thing that we go to, and maybe shift our thinking just a little bit, that is not the end game, and what happens in that is not the end game, but rather that is the launching pad into building relationships out of that. So it's what we do with the things that take place at camp after that from a relational standpoint that ultimately are going to matter big, So I think that'd be a great place to start.
Yeah, we're doing a broadcast on how events that can be relational focused and what events that help us do discipleship, because the big event is fun. And it's fun to see a lot of people there, and that moment's over. But that relationship that you can build out of that event, man, that's what changes the world. So, and thank both of you for coming on today. Chris, tell us about the podcast again. How can we get that?
Yeah, so Youth Ministry Podcast for Volunteers. If you search that on any big podcast thing, you can definitely get there. If you go on to gbabtist.org and find Next Gen on there, you could link to it from there also. But it is a podcast designed specifically for volunteers. We think it's the only one out there for that. And we keep them short. We try to do about 15, 20 minutes. And they're all of these topics are like how to get that kid in your group to talk that never talks, or how to get that kid in your group that talks too much to be quiet. Those are 2 episodes that we've actually recorded, right? So definitely that'd be that. And I would just say, as we hand it off to Jenni here, man, we're here for you. And if I can ever help anybody, man, just you can find me on gbabtist.org, and I'm willing to have a conversation, try to help anybody. But yeah, it's great.
Yep. And for kids ministry people, if you want to jump on our Facebook group page, it's Georgia Baptist Kids. We have lots of great interaction. It's a place to ask questions and get questions answered and just make new friends.
It's a great Facebook page. They actually all act like they've got sense on it too. It's not one of those like ridiculous Facebook groups, you know what I'm talking about, where people are like divisive and stuff. Like, it's actually really good. They help each other out there. It's awesome.
Feel seen. Are you talking about? No, he's not talking about. But yeah,
the discipleship one. No, I'm kidding.
I want to give one final shout out to your team, which is we had a leader. His name is Kelton. And Kelton reached out to Jenni Carter and said, how can we help move the needle in discipleship in our church? How can we help our kids? Because they're experiencing revival, much of what we've talked about on this broadcast today. And so through us tag teaming together and going out and preaching and teaching and using Spark as one of their next step opportunities to get some training. I mean, this church that had maybe 3 kids now has over 30. And they are just going, and it's just in Plainville, Georgia. I think it's Plainville, Georgia, Plainview. There's 2. I mean, Georgia's hard. And so Northwest Georgia, and they're just doing great. And so that's where we can help. So don't be afraid to reach out to any of our consultants, because we work as a team together to help you get that next win. And so thank you to the cooperative program that you give to that allows us to be able to do things like this, to invest in churches and to help serve churches to advance the gospel. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening. We want to continue the conversation from today's broadcast in a learning community near you. These learning communities are designed to celebrate your biggest wins, resource your greatest need, and help you finish well. We also want to give you a free gift, the 5 discipleship shifts most churches need to make to produce world-impacting disciple makers. You can download this resource by going to ministryboom.com. This 5-page PDF is a discipleship alignment checklist. The Georgia Baptist Mission Board is able to provide resources like this because of gifts from Georgia Baptists to the cooperative program. For more information on this broadcast and a customized discipleship plan for your church, visit gabaptist.org/discipleship. Engage with us on your time through Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and all podcast platforms. Lastly, if you've benefited from this conversation today, please share this with a friend as we seek to help churches make world-impacting disciple makers.